My son demanded $4 million like it was pocket change, ignoring that the $28 million came from my sweat and years of sacrifice. I thought nothing could hurt more than his greed. But when I watched my daughter-in-law slip something into my glass at my retirement party, I knew. Family betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it can end your life. This was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the old grandfather clock in the corner. The late afternoon sun poured through the window, spilling across the carpet, making the room feel warm, almost peaceful. But inside, I felt anything but peace. My mind wandered back to the years I had spent pouring everything I had into Michael's future. I remembered the long nights working 2 contracts just to cover his tuition, writing those checks until my hands ached. $60,000, every penny scraped together for his college education because I wanted him to have what I never had. I remembered his smile the day I handed him the keys to that Ford Mustang, $25,000 of pride wrapped in shiny red paint, a gift to mark his graduation. And then the wedding. Rachel wanted it perfect, and Michael insisted. I drained $40,000 from my savings account so they could have the ballroom, the string quartet, the champagne flowing like water. I told myself at the time it was worth it, that a father's duty was to provide, even when it meant sacrificing my own dreams. Sitting there now, I realized all those sacrifices had been twisted into something ugly. They weren't memories of love anymore. They had been repurposed as weapons, debts they thought I owed them forever. The house around me seemed to sigh with the weight of those memories. Every photo on the mantel told a story. Christmas mornings, birthdays, vacations where I held Michael on my shoulders. But as I stared at them, all I could see was how quickly those memories were being erased by greed. This home, valued now at $650,000, was more than walls and furniture. It was where my wife and I had built our life. The wooden floors, I had laid them with my own hands, sanding each board until it gleamed. The garden outside still carried the roses she planted, blooming faithfully every spring, even after she was gone. And now, Michael and Rachel were circling like vultures, eyeing not just the house, but the $28 million from the sale of my company. To them, it wasn't my security or my legacy. It was a jackpot, a lottery they felt entitled to collect. My chest tightened as I looked at the photo of my wife on the fireplace, her eyes gentle, her smile frozen in time. I whispered to her, barely audible, "I promised you I'd raise him right, that I'd give him the world. I kept that promise, but now he's turned his back on me." The words felt heavy, like stones falling into a well. It was the betrayal that hurt most, not the request for money, not even the demand. It was the way Michael looked at me, as if everything I had worked for meant nothing, as if I had been nothing more than a tool to fill his pockets. Instead of saying, "Congratulations, Dad, I'm proud of you," he slammed his fist and said, "What's $4 million to you?" Rachel stood there beside him, eyes sharp, not a trace of warmth. It wasn't just Michael anymore. It was both of them, a team bound not by love, but by calculation. They weren't asking me. They were cornering me, turning decades of sacrifice into an obligation. That was the moment I felt the crack inside, the fracture between the father I had been and the man I had to become. I spoke again to my wife's photograph, my voice trembling. I gave everything for him, and now he sees me as nothing but a wallet. What did we do wrong? The silence that followed was unbearable. For a while, I stayed sunk in that silence, hurt and shocked. My chest felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out my pride and left me with nothing but emptiness. But slowly, another feeling began to rise, crawling up from that emptiness like a flame catching on dry wood. Anger. Not the wild kind that fades quickly, but a steady, controlled burn. I realized if I stayed in this pit of shock, if I let myself drown in it, they would strip everything from me. They would take the house, the savings, The 28 million that represented 30 years of sweat and missed birthdays, and they would waste it on their schemes. I could not allow that. They might think of me as old, 65, tired, ready to be tucked away somewhere. But they were wrong. I wasn't weak. I wasn't done. And if they wanted to play this as a game, I had played harder games before and won. I rose from my chair, my knees stiff but steady, and walked to the study. The safe in the corner had been untouched for years, but my hands remembered the combination like muscle memory. The door opened with a low creak, and there they were, the documents that represented my life's work. The contract for the sale of the company, signed and sealed, the ink still fresh. The deed to this house, with my name printed clearly, proves that no one could touch it without my permission. And tucked in the back, an older document, my will, drafted before Rachel ever came into the picture. I pulled them all out and spread them across the desk. Each paper was a shield, a weapon, a reminder that I wasn't defenseless. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "They think I'm old, that I'll fold. But they've underestimated me." Artis? I ran my fingers along the edge of the sale contract, the number 28 million printed in bold ink, a number that represented every night I worked late, every risk I took when no one believed in me. That contract wasn't just money. It was proof that I had succeeded, proof that I had built something real. And now it was also proof that I had something worth protecting. I remembered my lawyer, Richard Cole, the man who had stood by me through 3 of my biggest deals. He knew every clause, every trick, every safeguard. I mouthed his name softly. "Richard, I might need you again." The thought steadied me. I wasn't alone. I had allies, I had experience, and most of all, I had the truth. The house grew quiet as evening fell, the shadows lengthening across the floor. I gathered the documents back into the safe, locking them with deliberate care. My heart was still heavy, but my mind was sharpening. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about defense, about strategy. They thought I was cornered, but what they didn't see was that I had the high ground. My eyes landed once more on my wife's picture, the smile that had carried me through the hardest years. "They think this is over," I said softly. But it's not. The game has just begun. The clock struck 7, its chime echoing through the house like a call to arms. For the first time since Michael's demand, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't finished. I had the documents. I had the experience. And I had a reason stronger than their greed. I would protect this house, this legacy, and myself. And when the time came, I would show them just how wrong they had been. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to a quiet house and a clear thought. I could sit here and ache, or I could stand up and act. The coffee tasted bitter, but it woke something in me. I took out a yellow pad, wrote the word "control" at the top, and underlined it twice. Then I picked up the phone. Richard Cole answered on the second ring. His voice has always been steady, even when mine is not. I told him the truth, not the whole story, but enough. My son demanded $4 million. My daughter-in-law stood beside him and looked at me like I was a vault. I said I needed safeguards in place today. Richard did not ask for drama. He asked for numbers. $2.5 million in my checking and sweep accounts, another $8 in a brokerage account. Certificates coming due in 60 days, about 1.3. He told me to freeze 2.5 immediately and to add a requirement that any transfer over 20,000 demanded my in-person signature. Pen on paper. No exceptions. He told me to set up alerts on every account and to make sure the bank knew no one had power of attorney. Not Michael, not Rachel, not anyone. Then his voice softened. He said, "We will put the house in a protective wrapper. We will set the rules, not them." I hung up and called my bank. The automation asked me to say my name. I said it clearly. Harold King. The fraud team picked up fast. I gave them account numbers, balances, and the words Richard used. Freeze 2.5 million. Flag anything over 20,000. Require my wet signature and a photo ID verified in person at the branch. The woman on the line paused, then repeated the instructions back to me like a pilot reading a checklist. We added a password phrase to my profile. We set a note in my file that no changes could be made by phone. The room felt lighter after I set the phone down. I was not helpless. Not today. By mid-morning, I was at the branch. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon and ink. People moved in slow lines. I sat across from the branch manager, a man about my son's age. He had careful hair and a careful smile. I slid my driver's license across the desk. I told him I was adding friction. I said the word slowly. Friction. I want it to be hard for anyone to move my money without me present. He tapped at his keyboard. He suggested two-factor authentication, text codes, and phone calls. I said no codes, no calls. I want my signature in blue ink. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. He printed a form, the paper still warm when he handed it to me. I signed 3 times. He asked if I wanted a safe deposit box. I said I wanted 2, one for the deed and one for documents that keep people honest. He did not press me to explain. He walked me to the vault, the air cooler there, the sound of metal on metal like a steady drum. Back home, I pulled the file boxes onto the dining table and began sorting. The sale contract with the 28 million figure sat on top of the stack like a small mountain. Beneath it, insurance policies, tax returns, the will I wrote before Rachel knew our name. I made neat piles, bank accounts, property, legal. I pulled the deed and property tax receipts for this house. $650,000 on the latest appraisal, but to me, it is worth more than any number. The maple floors I sanded myself. The doorway where we marked Michael's height with pencil lines. The kitchen where my wife burned her first Thanksgiving turkey and laughed until she cried. I set the deed aside as if it were fragile. I could feel a tremor in my hands, so I pressed my palms to the table until the shaking stilled. Richard called back after lunch. He had that attorney tone he uses when he knows I am barely holding the line. He said we should draft a homestead declaration and consider moving the house into a revocable trust with me as sole trustee. He said we should amend the will and restate my intent. Clear language, no room for misunderstanding. He offered to meet late afternoon. I looked out the window at the winter light and said yes. Then I said something I did not plan to say. I told him there was more. I told him about Rachel's eyes. I did not say poison. I did not say party. I just said this. I have reason to believe I need everything buttoned up, and I need it now. I drove to Richard's office before the traffic thickened. The waiting room had framed diplomas and a bowl of wrapped mints. I kept turning the silver wrapper in my fingers until it warmed. When he called me in, we sat at his table and went through the list. He drafted a short letter to my bank confirming my new instructions. He prepared a homestead declaration for me to sign and a trust document with my name printed in large type. He slid it over and tapped the page. He said, "This is not about distrust of family. This is about your right to decide." I nodded. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but not too heavy to lift. I signed. Date, signature, initials. He made copies and asked if I wanted the originals placed in the safe deposit box today. I said I would deliver them myself. He said the notary would meet us in the hall. He said I was doing the right thing. On the drive home, my phone lit up with Michael's name. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up and kept my voice calm. He did not. He said he was coming over. He said he was tired of me dragging my feet. He said other fathers knew how to support their kids. He did not use the word demand this time. He used the word deserve. I said nothing for a good 5 seconds. Silence can be a wall. Then I said, "We can talk at my office at 5. If you raise your voice, you will leave." I hung up before he could answer. My hands were steady on the wheel. I got to the office a little after 4. I opened the blinds so the late light would fill the room. I put the sale contract into the safe and shut the door. I left out one document, the one with my name on the deed, and placed it on the desk at an angle where it could be seen but not reached. It was not bait. It was a reminder. This is mine. This is the house, the name, the work. Mine. 5 o'clock came on the hour. Michael did not knock. He stormed. The door hit the wall. He looked like he had not slept, or like he had been rehearsing anger. Rachel came in behind him. She sat in the chair across from me and crossed her legs with a careful grace. She did not greet me. Michael said he had decided on a number, 4 million. He said it as if he were doing me a favor by being specific. I kept my voice even. I said no. He paced in front of the desk. He told me a father invests in his son. He told me I owed him because I worked late when he was a kid. He told me I owed him because I could. I said the same word again. No. He slammed his palm on the desk. The pen rolled and fell to the floor. He did not pick it up. Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, not loud. She said, "You should feel lucky we came to ask in person. Plenty of people don't let their fathers keep a dime." Poge. It was so clean, so cold, that for 1 second it took my breath. It was the kind of line a person rehearses in the mirror. She said it with a small smile, meant to look like patience. I looked at her the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Quiet. Focused. In that moment, something inside me shifted from hurt to clarity. They were not here to talk. They were here to take. I felt the heat in my chest rise and then cool into something harder. Resolve. I told Michael they would go now. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain the law. I did not discuss feelings. I said, "This is my final word for today." He laughed in that way a son laughs when he thinks he still owns the room. Rachel stood up slowly, eyes scanning the desk, the papers, the safe. She put a hand on Michael's arm and steered him toward the door. She left one sentence behind her like a hook. "We will be at the party. We believe in celebrating family." Then they were gone. The door clicked shut as if the room itself exhaled. I sat alone, the light fading. I picked up the fallen pen, set it upright, and looked at the deed lying on the desk. I thought about the rooms it's named. I fixed the roof during a thunderstorm. The small leak in time. The day I carried my wife across the threshold when we were too young to own such a house. I slid the deed into a folder and locked it in the safe with the contract. The sound of the tumblers lined up felt like a promise. I turned the handle and said under my breath, "I am not a victim. I built this. If they want to fight, they will learn who I am." I went back to the yellow pad and began a new list. Bank alerts, done. Trust papers, in process. Homestead, signed. Next list, guest names for the retirement party. I added my friends who stood by me in the lean years. I added neighbors who watched me mow the lawn at dusk because I could not afford a gardener. I added my doctor, my banker, my old foreman, the Whitmans who brought soup when my wife got sick. I added Michael and Rachel. I printed the names neatly, one line at a time, and next to the last two, I drew a small square. A reminder. Watch, not react. I called the caterer, confirmed the time, and added a note about seating. Candles, low music, plenty of water. Then I called Richard one more time and told him I was following through with the plan. He asked if I needed security. I said the house has cameras. He asked if I wanted him to stop by near the end. I said that would be fine. His silence said he understood more than I told him. The next morning I went to the bank again. I brought a small metal box with me. I placed the original deed, the trust document, and a letter Richard had drafted into the safe deposit box. The letter was simple. It stated that I had exclusive control over all my accounts and property. It stated that no one, by marriage or otherwise, had any claim unless I said so in writing. It stated this house would not be sold. I set the box on the shelf and closed the little door. The clerk spun the key and smiled with the polite distance that keeps banks running. I walked out into the bright lot and felt the sun on my face. The feeling that followed was not joy. It was something steadier. A line drawn. On the third day, I met with my accountant. We moved funds into different buckets. We put $1 million into short-term treasuries with automatic rollovers. We set an account to pay property taxes on schedule. We built a small donor-advised fund with $100,000 because I wanted at least one thing in this mess to feel generous again. We set up a new checking account that only I could access. I wrote the balance on my pad, $50,000 for groceries, repairs, the small things that keep a house honest. I looked at those numbers and said a sentence out loud so I could hear it in my own voice. They do not get to decide what I built. Saying it made it real. In the afternoon, I drove to the house where I grew up. I parked across the street and sat in the car for a minute. The shutters were peeling now. The porch sagged a little, but the old maple was still there. I put my hand on the steering wheel and thought of my father, who never had $28 million, who never even had $28,000 in one place, but who had something my son seems to have misplaced. Gratitude. I whispered, "Dad, I won't let them take what you taught me." The wind moved the branches and the leaves shook like a quiet applause. Back home, the phone buzzed with messages I did not open. I set it face down and walked the hallway, checking the frames on the wall. Pictures from summers at the lake. Michael had frosting on his nose at age 6. Rachel at their wedding in a dress I helped pay for. I looked at each image as if I were auditing a ledger. What did I invest? What return did I get? It is a cold way to look at family, but sometimes it helps to say the quiet math out loud. I took a soft rag and wiped the dust from the glass. Then I did something that surprised me. I laughed, not because any of this was funny, because even now, even this far into the fight, this house still felt like home, and that meant I was fighting from strength, not from fear. The day before the party, I called Michael. I kept it simple. Be on time. Dress respectfully. No talk of money in front of guests. He said he understood. His tone held that casual confidence I know too well. The kind of man wears when he thinks he has already won. He said he was glad I was coming around. He said the family should share. I let the words fall and did not pick them up. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote one more list. Names of people I trust. Names of people to stand near me when I make a toast. Names of people to watch the drink table. It felt strange to write it, but I wrote it anyway. Not because I expected trouble, because I have learned that trouble often arrives when you least expect it. That night I could not sleep, so I walked through the rooms. In the hallway, the nightlight cast a soft circle on the floor. In the study, the safe looked like a small black guard. I opened the curtains and let the moon in. The garden glowed silver. The roses looked pale and brave. I stood there, bare feet on cool wood, and said quietly to the empty room, "They think I have already lost. They think I am old and easy." I let the words hang. Then I said the rest. They are wrong. The game has just begun. Morning came with a clean sky. The rental chairs arrived. The caterer set up in the kitchen and on the back patio. I walked the perimeter like a man checks a fence. Not paranoid, prepared. I moved the decanters to a table I could see from the head of the room. I asked the bartender to keep the wine near the far end until I gave the word. He said, "Sure, sir," and smiled the easy smile of a person who has not yet seen what people will do for money. Before noon, Richard texted. He would stop by in the last hour. He asked if I wanted the letters in an envelope with my name on them, sealed, ready if needed. I told him yes. Then I set the phone down and looked at the old clock across the room. I thought of my wife and her way of handling a crowd. She always found the one person who looked uncomfortable and made them feel seen. I closed my eyes and asked her for that grace, just a little, just enough to get me to the other side of tonight. By mid-afternoon, the house looked like a magazine. Candles in glass cylinders, white flowers with green leaves, napkins folded into neat triangles. I walked out onto the patio and tested the lights. Warm and low, the way evening should be. A neighbor waved over the fence and said it was going to be a beautiful night. I said it would be, and I meant it, because beauty and danger often share a border, and I wanted to stand exactly on that line, calm as stone. As the sun tilted down, I went back to the study and opened the safe one more time. I looked at the contract, $28 million in black ink. I looked at the deed, $650,000 in county value. But the number that mattered most was not printed on any line. It was the number of times I have stood up when someone tried to push me down. I closed the safe and spun the dial. The sound settled me. I took a breath that felt like I had been holding it for 3 days. Then I picked up the small sealed envelope Richard had left with his clerk and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. It was light, but it felt like armor. I stepped into the hallway as the doorbell rang for the first time. Friends would fill this house in minutes. Laughter would fill the rooms. Music would hush the edges. And somewhere in that motion, Michael and Rachel would arrive wearing their practiced smiles. They would think they were walking into a victory lap. They would think the pressure had worked. They would think I had bent. They would be wrong. What they do not know is simple. I have placed my money where they cannot touch it. I have secured this house. I have sharpened my will. I have written letters that cannot be unread. More than that, I have found my center again. I can feel it in my steps as I walk toward the front door. I can hear it in my own voice as I tell myself the line I plan to keep close all night. They think I am weak. They are about to learn their mistake. I put my hand on the knob and paused for just a heartbeat. The quiet before a song begins. The small stillness before the first note. Then I opened the door and smiled. Whatever happens tonight, I am ready. I have set the table. I have set the rules. And tucked inside my jacket is something that, if needed, will change everything. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. The house glowed like a lantern, candles in tall glass, soft jazz drifting through the rooms, flowers in low bowls that smelled faintly of lemon and spring. Friends filled the hallways. Old colleagues pressed my hand and told stories from lean years. Neighbors laughed on the patio under string lights. I moved among them with a steady smile and a careful eye. I could taste relief on my tongue, but it wasn't the wine. It was the knowledge tucked in my jacket pocket. A sealed envelope from my lawyer. The papers from yesterday's trust. My accounts are locked with new rules. $2.5 million frozen. Transfers over $20,000 requiring my ink in person with ID. The house is protected. I had set the table and the rules. Tonight was for celebration and for something else. When Michael walked in, conversations bent toward him like tall grass in the wind. Rachel was beside him. Black dress, calm face, a gold bracelet that caught the light. She touched the bartender's rimmed tray and smiled as if nothing in the world could be wrong. Michael hugged me too tightly. He used my first name, not Dad. I let it pass. I showed them where to sit. The Whitmans waved them over. Edward and Helen Miller took their seats near the fountain, faces open, ready to enjoy an evening that should have been simple. The very thought of simplicity made my chest ache. I stood near the drink table and nodded to the bartender. "Keep the bottles together," I said earlier. "Let me give the first pour." It took only 1 hour for Rachel to test the room. She rose with a clink of glass and the practiced smile of a person who knows how to turn a crowd. "To Harold," she said, and the name sounded like a polished coin in her mouth. $28 million. Not small change, and I have a feeling that money will be invested in the next generation very soon. Our laughter skimmed across the table like pebbles on water. Polite, easy. The kind of laugh people use when they are not sure what to do. I did not laugh. Rachel's eyes slid to mine, and in that look I saw what she wanted me to see. Superiority. Ownership. She set the glass down and patted Michael's hand as if she had done a good deed. I felt heat rise in my face, then settle into a cool center. People went back to their plates, forks lifted, napkins rustled, music softened the edges. I excused myself to the living room under the pretense of a call, and when I returned, I paused by the wide window that overlooks the patio. The surface of the wine in my glass caught the light. I have always liked that deep garnet color. It reminds me of autumn. It reminds me of patience. I set the glass on the table near the decanters and turned to greet the Whitmans. That is when I saw Rachel's hand over my glass. The motion was quick, not nervous, not clumsy, practiced. Her back was to most of the guests. She glanced left, then right, her smile never leaving her face. A small packet appeared between two fingers. A pinch, a tilt, a white sift like dust across a beam of light. A short stir with a stick she plucked from the bar. The packet slid back into her clutch. She drifted 2 steps away and asked the server about the salmon as if she had never paused. Time slowed in the way it does when a car slides on black ice. Quiet, cold, exact. I did not move at first. I watched. I counted a beat and then another to steady my breathing. From the corner of my vision, I could see Edward standing near the fountain, telling a story to the neighbor from 2 houses down. He gestured with his glass, the wine leaving a red smile on the crystal. I walked to the table as if I were adjusting place settings. A napkin here, a candle there. I lifted my glass and set it in his spot. I lifted his glass and set it in mine. Not dramatic, not secretive. Just 2 small objects changing places by a man who owns the table they rest on. Rachel's eyes flicked to the glass and then to me. She did not blink. Her face did not change. For 1 second. Then she turned and asked Michael something I could not hear. He shrugged, the way a son shrugs when he thinks the world owes him ease. I stood with my hands lightly on the backs of 2 chairs and felt the wood under my palms. It steadied me. The room swelled with chatter. A friend pulled me into a circle of stories about our first office, about the old server rack that clicked at night. I nodded when I needed to. I waited. When the time felt right, I lifted a spoon and tapped my glass. Conversation fell into soft silence. The jazz quieted. Faces turned toward me with warmth, with curiosity. I felt their kindness like a blanket across my shoulders. I did not want to crush the evening with what I had to say, but I would not let the evening crush me. "Friends," I began, and my voice carried in the calm air. "Thank you for standing with me through thick and thin. We built something together, and tonight I wanted to say thank you." Heads nodded, smiles widened. I held their eyes a beat longer. Then I said what had to be said. Before we raise a toast, I need to ask one person to put down their glass. Mr. Miller, Edward, please don't drink. The silence turned sharp. Every sound in the garden stopped. Even the small burble of the fountain felt quieter. Edward froze, his wine halfway to his mouth. "Please," I said again, and held out my hand toward the drink table. "I have reason to believe someone just tried to poison me. The glass at your place was mine." The word hung there. Poison. It did what that word always does. It made people step back. It made hearts trip. Murmurs rose around the table like wind through tall grass. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. The Whitmans stared at Rachel as if their eyes could pin her to the chair. Rachel laughed. A light, dismissive sound. "That's absurd," she said. "Who would do such a thing at a party? You must have misunderstood." She tilted her head, all concern and innocence. "You look tired, Harold. Maybe sit for a minute." I looked at the glass. I looked at her. Then I looked at Michael. He wanted me to fold. He wanted me to drop this and let the room swallow my words. He gave me that old schoolyard smirk that used to get him out of trouble with teachers. Something inside me stopped moving. I said, "I saw you. I saw the packet, the stir, the pocket. I was in the living room by the window. It's recorded when the hallway camera caught the reflection in the glass. We can send the wine to a lab. We can do this cleanly." People shifted in their seats. The bartender took a step backward. Edward set his glass down slowly, hands shaking. Michael scoffed. "You're paranoid," he said. "You're making a scene." Rachel rose to standing, palms open. "If there's a concern, let's just settle it," she said. She reached for the glass near her elbow. My glass moved to Edward's place, and with a single flick of her wrist, she tipped it. The crystal fell. It hit a stone. It shattered. The red spread in a bloom across the patio like a wound. For a second, no one breathed. Then the room breathed all at once. "Oh, no," Rachel said, hand to her chest. "I'm clumsy. I'm so sorry." She bent toward the shards, but she didn't touch them. She looked up at me with eyes full of the wrong kind of tears. Forced, meant for anyone who needed a story. "Accidents happen," she whispered. "No," I said. One word. "Steady." I turned toward the server, who had been standing stiff for 5 minutes with a tray. "Would you please bring me the small envelope behind the bar? The one with my name." He blinked, then moved. My heart had been beating in my throat, but as I waited for the envelope, it dropped back into my chest where it belonged. The server placed the envelope in my hand. I broke the seal. I pulled out the letter with Richard's careful language and a second, smaller note. I looked at the first line and read aloud. "This is a formal notice that, effective today, all of my liquid accounts are under additional security restrictions and may not be accessed by any party but me. Transfers over $20,000 require my presence, identification, and signature. $2.5 million has been frozen. All other funds are under multi-factor verification managed by counsel. No power of attorney exists in favor of any family member." I folded that page. I lifted the second. "This is a revocable living trust in my name. The house valued at $650,000 is now titled in the trust. The sole trustee is me. No beneficiary has any claim or control over my decisions. An amendment to my will removes any person who attempts to coerce, threaten, or defraud me from receiving any inheritance." You could feel the air shift. The words did what words, backed by ink and law, always do. They rearranged the room. Rachel's face lost its patience. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a man catching water where he expected air. Edward made a sound I have only heard once before, in a hospital hallway, when news is given that cannot be taken back. Helen leaned toward him, both hands on his arm. Rachel found her voice first. It snapped. "You can't do that," she said. "You can't just change things because you're upset." I kept my gaze steady. "I can," I said. "I did?" I turned to Michael. "And if you truly believed I was going to share $28 million because you demanded it, that belief ends now. You looked at my life like a lottery ticket. You forgot I bought the ticket, with decades, with nights, with missed ball games and dinners eaten cold on the back porch. I built this. It is not yours to spend." Michael stepped forward, but 2 of my oldest friends stood without being asked. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough to draw a line he should not cross. He struggled for the right tone. "We were just asking," he said. "Families help each other." The last 3 words wobbled. The certainty had begun to drain from his voice, leaving something raw and unpracticed. "You're twisting this." "You asked," I said, "and then you demanded, and tonight your wife chose something worse." I looked at Rachel. "You tried to take my life and call it an accident in advance." She shook her head, hard. "No proof," she said, the 2 words brittle. "No glass, no test." I held up the small note still in my hand. "The hallway camera recorded the reflection in the living room glass," I said quietly. "It caught the hand and the packet. The angle is not perfect. It's enough." I nodded toward the open French doors. Richard had stepped onto the patio without fanfare. He does that. He arrived near the end, as promised. He stood a step behind me and a little to the left, a position of support, not show. He said only one sentence. "Mrs. King, we have preserved enough to proceed." Rachel's calm broke like thin ice under a boot. She pointed at me. "He's lying," she said to the crowd. "He's making this up to cut us out. He hates me. He hates us." Her voice sharpened, rose, turned shrill on the last word. Michael grabbed her elbow to bring her back down into a chair. She shook him off. "You think anyone will believe this?" she said to me. At a party? With your friends? I let the quiet rest a moment before I answered. They will believe me, I said, because I am telling the truth, because I am calm, because I did not spring this without preparation, and because I have chosen to be merciful tonight. Heads tilted. People leaned in without moving. Merciful, I repeated, so my own heart would hear it. I could call the police right now and ask for a report. I could ask every guest to give a statement. I could send samples from the tablecloth for testing. I could do all of that. I lifted the envelope once more. Instead, I am making a different choice. I am drawing a line. The legal pieces are already in place. You cannot sell this house. You cannot touch my money. You cannot force me anywhere I do not choose to go. And if you attempt to do so again, the next call is not to a caterer or a friend. It is to the authorities. The patio absorbed those words like dry ground takes rain. Rachel's chest heaved with a breath she could not turn into a sentence. Michael's shoulders slumped as if someone had quietly removed the frame that held him upright. He looked at the spilled wine like it could answer a question. He spoke without looking up. "We didn't mean harm," he said, then corrected himself with a small flinch. "I didn't mean harm." The correction sounded like a confession by omission. Edward pushed his chair back and stood, not quickly, not slowly, just with the full weight of a father who has realized his daughter has lost her way. "Rachel," he said, voice low, "what have you done?" She reached for him and then stopped. There was no ground under her feet now, no easy story to lay across the broken glass. She gathered her clutch. She turned to go. Then she turned back with one last try at the only weapon she understood. "If you disinherit us," she said, "you will die alone." It was small and mean and empty. I felt the old pain rise at those words, the fear that lives under every parent's ribcage. Then I felt it pass. I looked at the faces around me, friends from 40 years, neighbors who showed up when the power went out, my doctor, the Whitmans, Richard. "No," I said, "I will not." Rachel left through the side gate, heels striking stone, each step a little faster than the one before it. Michael took 2 steps after her and stopped. He looked at me for something I could not give, permission maybe, or the old version of me who never said no. He swallowed, nodded to no one, and followed her into the dark. The gate clicked shut, a sound small and final. The evening did not collapse after that. It settled. People stood and touched my shoulder as they passed. Some hugged me, some did not. The bartender brought a pitcher of water and set it quietly at my elbow. Someone brought a small broom and tray to tend the glass. We moved as people do after a storm, taking stock, checking on one another with eyes and hands. Richard remained at my side, but said very little. He did not need to say much. His presence was a paragraph. I lifted my glass, not the one on the ground, but a clean one, and said I had something else to read. Not long, just a few lines. The trust language I had signed that morning had one sentence I wanted in the room. Any person who attempts to coerce, intimidate, manipulate, or defraud me forfeits every gift, share, or benefit named in any will or schedule. I looked up. That includes you, Michael, not because I am angry right now, because this is who I am becoming. Clear, firm, free. There was no applause. There did not need to be. The quiet felt like respect. People returned to their seats. The jazz came back on at a lower volume. Plates reappeared. For a while, we spoke about gardens and road trips and memory. We let normal be the medicine it knows how to be. The night thinned toward its end, and one by one my guests left, with eyes that said they would check on me soon. The Whitmans were last. Linda took my face in her hands like a sister. "You did what had to be done," she said, and there were 3 small tears in her voice. George shook my hand in the way men sometimes use to say what they cannot say without breaking. Then it was just me and the candle glow, and the hush that follows hard truth. I walked the patio slowly and paused by the red stain that had already begun to fade at the edges. I stood at the sink and washed my hands for longer than needed, as if the act could rinse more than tonight from my skin. In the study, I placed Richard's letter back in its envelope and set it beside the safe. I did not lock it away. I wanted it close, visible, a reminder and a promise. I looked at my wife's photo on the bookshelf and whispered, "They thought I was weak. Now they see the cost of underestimating me." The words didn't feel like victory. They felt like alignment. My voice steadied on the last four. I am still here. I stepped onto the front porch. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked once and then settled. The air smelled like cut grass and candle smoke. I sat on the top step and let my back rest against the post. I thought of the boy Michael used to be and the man he had chosen to become. I thought of Edward and Helen driving home with a silence heavy enough to bend the air between them. I thought of Rachel's last sentence and how small it sounded now in the wide night. "Alone," she said. But I was not alone. Not anymore. Not after tonight. This is the part where people expect a clean ending. It is not clean. The law will take its slow path. The paper will be filed. Conversations will be had that no one wants to have. There will be mornings when the house feels too quiet, and evenings when the memory of a small boy in pajamas will knock the wind out of me. But there will also be something else. Peace. The kind you earn, the kind you protect, the kind that comes when you choose yourself without apology. I rose and went back inside. I turned off the lamps one by one. In the hallway, I stopped to listen to the old clock. It ticked in that calm way clocks have, reminding us the world moves forward, whether or not we are ready. I whispered one last promise into the dim. "Tomorrow," I said, "I begin again." And I believed it. Feeling overlooked and treated unfairly like that is tough, isn't it? If you believe everyone deserves to be recognized and protected, comment the keyword justice. Now, let's see what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after the party, the air in the house felt different. The flowers were still fresh, the silver trays stacked neatly in the kitchen, the faint smell of candle wax lingering in the air. But something heavy had lifted. The night before had ended with glass shattered on stone, with Rachel's heels vanishing into the dark, and with Michael's shoulders collapsing under the weight of his own choices. Now it was quiet, and that quiet did not feel lonely. It felt earned. I sat at the oak desk in my study, the same desk where I had once signed payroll checks and contracts worth millions, and I opened the folder Richard had left for me. My hand traced the thick paper. Words on paper can be cold, but they can also carry warmth, especially when they protect you. Richard's voice on the phone was calm, reassuring, the way it always was. He told me the legal filings had been completed that morning. Michael's name was removed from every will, every trust, every beneficiary line. The ink was still drying in some places, but the law was already clear. There would be no loopholes, no sudden signatures sneaked in under pressure. I asked him to take one more step. From the accounts that had once been the center of so much bitterness, I authorized a transfer of $3 million into a community trust. Scholarships for kids who couldn't dream of paying for college, a fund for veterans who had returned home with broken bodies and no safety net, and a wing for the town's library that had always operated on bake sales and borrowed hope. It wasn't charity as much as it was clarity. If Michael and Rachel thought my fortune was theirs by birthright, I wanted the world to see what I had always believed. Money is a tool, not a promise. By the afternoon, I had walked through the house with a notepad, making decisions I had delayed for too long. The office where I had once entertained clients would be stripped of files and turned into a library, shelves running from floor to ceiling. The room where deals had been made and futures decided would now hold the memories I chose to keep. Framed photographs of my wife, the baseball Michael hit out of the park when he was 12, a quilt my mother stitched by hand. I could already see the leather chairs, the warm lamplight, a space not for contracts, but for peace. Friends visited over the next weeks. They brought food, not because I needed it, but because food is the language of comfort. We sat in that half-finished library, and for the first time in a long while, the laughter that filled the house was not about deals or wealth. It was about life, about the ordinary things that never betray you. Fishing trips, lost dogs found, the stubborn glory of tomatoes that finally ripen in September. News about Michael and Rachel spread faster than I expected. Small towns have long memories, and even in cities, certain stories travel on invisible wires. People talked about what happened at the party. Some details grew sharper with the telling, others fuzzier, but the core truth remained. A son and his wife had tried to take what was not theirs, and worse, had crossed a line that no family should cross. Michael, desperate and cornered, sold his BMW within a week. That car, shiny and loud, had always been his way of proving something, though I was never sure what. The sale barely touched his debts. Rachel disappeared not long after. She left behind more than gossip. She left behind a wake of suspicion, her name whispered in disapproval at charity luncheons and church steps. For people like her, reputation is currency, and she had spent it all on greed. I heard Michael tried to find work in another town, but wherever he went, the whispers followed. There is no easy way to outrun the shadow of betrayal. He called once. The phone rang and rang until I picked up, and his voice was thin, frayed at the edges. "Dad," he said, I didn't know it would go that far." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wanted to remember him as the boy with the baseball bat, cheeks flushed from running the bases. But I couldn't. The weight of his choices pressed too heavily. I answered carefully. "Michael, you made your decisions, and I made mine. This line is here for a reason." He went quiet. The silence stretched so long I thought the line had gone dead. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." I let the words hang in the air. Then I said, "I don't need an apology. I need peace." And I ended the call. For me, that was the real freedom. Not the money secured, not the house protected, but the choice to step back without guilt. To know that I could live the rest of my days without the constant pull of someone else's entitlement. I spent my mornings in the garden, cutting roses, pulling weeds, and watching squirrels steal from the bird feeder. I read books I had promised myself I would read decades ago. I began sketching again, filling pages with rough lines that only meant something to me. And each evening, when the light turned golden across the walls of the house, I felt my chest loosen, as if I had finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. Meanwhile, Michael's isolation grew. Friends who once admired his access to wealth turned their backs. Even the Millers, Rachel's parents, kept their distance after the humiliation of that night. I heard Edward had confronted Rachel before she left, and the words had been sharp enough to cut ties for good. Michael was left with little more than debts and regrets. That was his world now, a mirror of choices made, each one leading him further away from the man he could have been. Sitting in my new library, I reflected on what had happened. The truth that rose above all the noise was simple. Blood is not a guarantee of love. Being a parent doesn't mean owning your children's riches. The real inheritance we give, if we are wise, is character, honesty, and the ability to stand on our own feet. I whispered it aloud one night, almost like a prayer. Character is the only wealth no one can steal. And in saying it, I felt a weight roll off my shoulders. I no longer measured my days by battles fought, but by peace kept. Friends noticed. They said I seemed lighter, younger even. I laughed at that. Age doesn't reverse, but peace does soften its edges. I didn't look for reconciliation with Michael. I didn't wait for Rachel's name to be cleared. It never would be. Instead, I drew my boundaries sharply and clean. If they came to my door again, they would find it closed, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. I don't need them anymore, I told myself one evening. I have myself. That sentence stayed with me, like a vow. One afternoon, as I sorted through the day's mail, I found a letter from a local charity. They had heard about the community trust I had funded. They invited me to join their advisory board to use my experience to shape programs for families in need. I held the letter in my hands for a long time, tracing the words, feeling something stir inside me. This is family, I thought. Not blood, not entitlement, but people bound by respect, by shared purpose, by gratitude. I felt a small smile pull at my mouth, the kind that comes not from joy alone, but from recognition. That evening, I sat in the library surrounded by the things I had chosen to keep. The photograph of my wife seemed to glow a little in the lamplight. I spoke to her the way I often did when the house was too quiet. "I'm all right," I told her softly. "I finally found the place where I belong. They thought they could break me, but I know better now. I am worthy of peace, and I have it." The room seemed to answer back with its silence, a silence that was no longer empty, but full. The story did not end with bitterness, though bitterness could have been the easy road. It ended with boundaries, with peace, with the truth spoken aloud. Michael and Rachel bore the weight of their choices. I bore the freedom of mine. That was enough. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought of tomorrow, of the meeting with the charity, of the possibility of giving my time, not just my money, of seeing my life's work turned outward, not inward. And I thought of something else, a lesson that needed to be said, not just to myself, but to anyone who might listen. Family is not defined by who takes your blood, but by who respects your boundaries. Love is not owed, it is chosen, and dignity, once claimed, is never surrendered. Tomorrow would come, and I would be ready. The weeks after the storm settled into something softer, something I had almost forgotten was possible. I no longer woke up with my chest tight, wondering what new demand or betrayal would land on my doorstep. Instead, I rose with the morning light spilling through the curtains of my new apartment, a modest place compared to the house I once guarded so fiercely, but filled with a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. From the balcony I could see the park stretching wide and green, and children's laughter carried through the air like proof that life kept moving forward, even after the deepest cuts. I had joined a local charity group not long after the court and family battles were behind me. It felt almost ironic. Using part of the fortune my son had tried so hard to claim, I pledged $100,000 to fund scholarships for students who, like him years ago, could never have afforded their education without help. The difference was that these young people would understand the gift for what it was. They would not see it as entitlement or as a ticket to demand more, but as a chance to build something of their own. Sitting in that community hall, watching those students' faces light up as their names were called, I felt a satisfaction no business deal had ever given me. I reminded myself of the lesson I had learned, the one etched into every decision I made now. Self-respect is worth more than blood ties when those ties turn into chains. There had been a time when I thought family was unquestionable, that no matter what, I owed my son everything. But betrayal forces clarity. That night in the courtroom, that night at the party, those nights of silence after Rachel disappeared, each one carved into me the truth that being a father doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. Sitting alone one evening, I whispered it to myself, the words simple but strong. I don't need their apology. I have my life, and that is enough. Saying it aloud gave the thought weight, like nailing it into the foundation of the new life I was building. News of Michael reached me occasionally, not because I sought it out, but because people always find a way to talk. He had moved into a small rented apartment on the edge of town. The BMW was gone, sold off to cover debts. Jobs came and went, but he could never escape the shadow of what had happened. Rachel had vanished entirely, whether she left for another city, another man, or simply out of shame, no one seemed to know. What they left behind was silence and suspicion, the kind that lingers in grocery store aisles and in church pews. A letter arrived once, written in Michael's handwriting, the loops messier than I remembered. He wrote of regret, of missing family, of wanting forgiveness. I held that envelope in my hands for a long time before setting it in the drawer of my new desk. I never wrote back. The boundary was there for a reason, and crossing it would only reopen wounds I had worked so hard to close. One afternoon, while organizing books in the library I had carved out of a spare room, I stumbled upon a small box I hadn't opened in years. Inside was my father's old pocket watch, its silver dulled by time but still ticking faintly when I wound it. I sat back in the chair, the weight of it resting in my palm, and a smile spread across my face. That watch had been his pride, not for its worth in money, but for the discipline it represented. He had once told me, "Character is the only inheritance I can truly give you." At the time, I didn't fully understand. But holding it now, I realized he had been right all along. Money comes and goes, houses rise and fall, and companies are bought and sold. But character, the willingness to stand tall, to draw boundaries, to value dignity, remains. That was the inheritance I wanted to carry forward, and it was the only one I intended to pass on to the world. I often walked through the park in the evenings, letting the cool air fill my lungs. Children played, couples strolled, and older men like me fed breadcrumbs to pigeons, their hands trembling with age but steady with purpose. It was in those walks that I found the closing chapter of this long ordeal. I thought of parents like me who sacrifice so much, believing their children will honor it. I thought of children, so many who forget that gratitude is richer than entitlement, and I thought of the world we live in now, where people sometimes value what they can take more than what they can build. The lessons are simple but sharp. To parents, love your children, guide them, but never believe that sacrifice means surrendering your self-respect. Set boundaries because without them, love becomes weakness. To children, remember what was given to you, not just in dollars, but in time, in sweat, in the quiet nights your parents went without so you could have enough. Gratitude is the true inheritance, and demanding more only robs you of your dignity. And for all of us in this modern world where greed often drowns out grace, let us remember. Character is the one possession. No thief, no betrayal, no market crash can ever take away. As I stood one evening at the edge of the park, the sun setting in shades of gold and violet, I felt something close like a book whose story had finally reached its end. The betrayal had scarred me, yes, but it had also taught me. It had given me back my voice, my boundaries, and my peace. My son and Rachel would live with their choices. I would live with mine. That was the cleanest separation, the most honest ending. I walked home slowly, the pocket watch tucked into my coat, its quiet ticking a reminder of time passing, of lessons learned, of peace finally kept. When I reached my door, I paused and said aloud, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself. I finally found where I belong." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled in the air around me, warm and solid, like a promise I had made and kept. And that is how the story closes, not with shouting, not with courtroom drama, not with the weight of wealth dividing us, but with silence, with peace, with a truth carried steady into the rest of my days. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.